In the early spring of 2023, the small town of Millbrook hummed with a quiet, unassuming rhythm. Nestled in the gentle folds of the Appalachian foothills, its streets were lined with maple trees just beginning to bloom, their pinkish-white petals drifting lazily in the mild breeze. Millbrook was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's name, where front porches hosted evening conversations, and where the past seemed to linger as palpably as the scent of fresh-baked bread from the local bakery. It was a town that prided itself on its traditions and the comforting predictability of everyday life. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, something strange was stirring, something that would soon unravel the very fabric of the community's collective understanding of death, memory, and the unseen. Before we unravel the eerie mystery of a boy who blinked in every funeral photo, a phenomenon that intertwines loss, memory, and the supernatural, remember to subscribe and like the video to keep up with our intriguing tales. And tell me, what thoughts arise for you as we embark on this haunting exploration? Helen Marsh, a local photographer whose studio had been a fixture on Main Street for over a decade, was the first to notice the anomaly. Helen was known for her keen eye and a gentle patience that coaxed even the most reticent subjects into moments of genuine expression. Her work ranged from portraits of newborns to the weathered faces of Millbrook's oldest residents, but she held a particular affinity for funerals. Not out of morbidity, but out of a deep-seated belief that a photograph could capture the intangible essence of grief, preserving a moment of farewell that words could never fully convey. It was during the funeral of her own Uncle Leonard in late March that Helen's attention was first drawn to something inexplicable. Leonard had been a beloved figure in the town, a retired schoolteacher with a booming laugh and a penchant for storytelling. The service was simple, held in the old chapel that dated back to Millbrook's founding, and Helen had been asked to take photographs for the family archive. As she reviewed the images later that evening, preparing to send them to the family, she noticed something odd. In every group photo, near the edge of the frame, a young boy appeared, always standing, always blinking. What unsettled Helen most was that this boy was not part of the mourners she had seen that day. He wore a faded blue jacket and a pair of well-worn sneakers, his hair tousled in a way that suggested a child at play, rather than at a solemn funeral. At first, Helen dismissed the images as a trick of light or a camera glitch. She scrutinized the original negatives and digital files, but the boy's presence was consistent and undeniable. More troubling was the fact that he blinked, something that, in photography, defied explanation. A still image could capture a single, frozen moment, but blinking implied movement and life preserved somehow in the frame. Helen's curiosity deepened into a quiet obsession. She began to collect funeral photographs from her archives, from friends, and even from strangers in town, asking discreetly for copies of images taken during memorial services over the past several decades. What she uncovered was nothing short of extraordinary. The boy was in every funeral photo she examined, always positioned near the grieving families, always blinking. His clothing remained unchanged, as if preserved in time, and his expression was one of gentle curiosity rather than sorrow. Helen named him Tommy, a name she had heard whispered in the town's older circles, though no one could quite place the boy's identity. The photographs spanned generations, yet Tommy's appearance was timeless, a spectral constant in the town's rituals of mourning. Millbrook's residents responded to Helen's revelations with a mixture of disbelief, fascination, and unease. Some dismissed it as a shared hallucination, a trick of collective memory given form by the camera's lens. Others whispered of hauntings and restless spirits, referencing old tales that had long been relegated to the realm of superstition. The local newspaper ran a cautious piece, framing the story as a curious oddity rather than a supernatural event. But the article ignited a spark of intrigue that soon spread beyond the town's borders. Helen's investigations revealed that the tradition of photographing funerals in Millbrook was itself a deeply rooted practice, one that dated back over a century. Early settlers had believed that capturing the last image of their loved ones ensured safe passage to the afterlife, a belief intertwined with the town's founding legends and early religious customs. The photographs served as communal keepsakes, tangible remembrances of loss and continuity. Yet none had noticed Tommy until now, their eyes accustomed to the familiar faces and rituals, but blind to the boy who had lingered silently in the background. As Helen delved deeper, she found herself drawn into the town's history more intimately than she had anticipated. Millbrook was not merely a collection of houses and streets, but a repository of stories, some joyful, some tragic, many forgotten. The funerals she photographed were more than farewells. They were the town's way of remembering its own identity, of weaving individual loss into the larger communal fabric. Tommy's presence in these images suggested a bridge between past and present, life and death, memory and reality. The phenomenon challenged Helen's understanding of photography itself. Cameras captured moments as they were, yet here was proof that something else was at play, something that defied the laws of physics and perception. The blinking boy was at once a ghostly figure and an undeniable part of the town's visual history. Helen's studio became a hub for those seeking answers, for families hoping to understand the boy who blinked in every funeral photo. She began holding informal meetings, inviting residents to share their own experiences and to bring photographs for collective examination. The community's response was far from uniform. Some embraced the mystery, finding comfort in the idea that Tommy's presence was a form of protection, a silent witness to grief who acknowledged their pain without judgment. Others recoiled, fearing that the boy's blinking was a sign of unresolved sorrow, a spirit trapped between worlds, unable to move on. Arguments erupted in local forums about whether funeral photography should continue, with some advocating for bans or altered practices to avoid capturing Tommy's image altogether. Despite these tensions, Helen remained steadfast in her mission. She documented every new photograph, catalogued every sighting, and interviewed those who claimed to have seen Tommy outside the frame of the camera. Her meticulous records grew into a vast archive that traced the boy's appearance through time, a testament to the persistence of a phenomenon that no one could explain, yet all felt compelled to understand. In the quiet moments between photographing funerals, Helen reflected on the paradox of her discovery. Tommy was a symbol of the town's collective memory, a living echo of grief and remembrance made manifest in the most unexpected way. His blinking, so ordinary, so human, was a subtle reminder that death was not an end, but a complex, ongoing conversation between the living and the departed. As spring deepened into summer, Helen's work became more than a photographic project. It became a journey into the heart of Millbrook itself. The town, with its intertwined histories and whispered secrets, was awakening to a mystery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about loss, presence, and the fragile boundary that separates this world from the next. Tommy, the boy who blinked in every funeral photo, was no longer just an enigma trapped in time. He was a catalyst for a community's reckoning with its own shadowed past and the unseen threads that bind them all. In the days following her unsettling discovery during Uncle Leonard's funeral, Helen Marsh found herself drawn into a web of images and memories that refused to loosen their grip. Each photograph she examined seemed to whisper the same haunting question. Who was this boy who blinked, appearing persistently in the background of funeral portraits? The more Helen sought answers, the more the mystery deepened, and soon the presence of the boy, whom she had come to call Tommy, began to dominate conversations throughout Millbrook. Helen's initial encounter with Tommy was personal and disquieting. Reviewing the photos from Leonard's service late into the night, she noticed the boy's blinking eyes in the corner of every group shot. The boy's gaze was unflinching, and yet faintly curious, as if observing the grief-stricken families with a quiet attentiveness. But what troubled Helen most was the impossibility of his blinking itself. In photography, blinking was usually a flaw, a momentary lapse, a closed eyelid frozen in time. Yet here, the boy's eyes were always caught mid-blink, as if the camera had somehow captured motion in a still frame. Determined to understand, Helen began to seek out other funeral photos from her extensive archives. She sifted through albums of local families, church records, and even old newspapers that featured black and white images of mourners clad in somber attire. Slowly and methodically, she pieced together a pattern that defied all logic. Tommy was there, always there. Wherever a child's funeral was being commemorated in Millbrook, Tommy appeared, wearing the same faded blue jacket, the same scuffed sneakers, and blinking with that same eerie consistency. The consistency of Tommy's appearance was striking. Not a single photograph showed him smiling or displaying sorrow. His expression was neutral, almost contemplative, as if he existed outside the human spectrum of grief. His clothes never changed, and his hair was perpetually tousled, as though caught in an invisible breeze. Helen's growing archive spanned decades, yet Tommy remained perpetually the same age. No older, no younger. He was a fixture, a silent observer embedded in the town's history of mourning. Word of Helen's discovery spread quickly. At first, it was hushed and tentative, shared in whispered conversations over coffee or exchanged in hushed tones at the local library. But as Helen presented her evidence at a community gathering, projecting slides of funeral photos onto a screen in the town hall, the room filled with a mix of disbelief, fascination, and unease. Faces lit by the pale glow of the projector watched as Tommy blinked again and again, each image punctuated by the faint sound of a shutter clicking. Reactions varied widely. Some dismissed the phenomenon as an elaborate hoax or a case of collective pareidolia, a psychological tendency to perceive familiar patterns where none exist. Others embraced more supernatural explanations, invoking the language of hauntings and restless spirits. Long-time residents recalled old tales of a mischievous child spirit said to roam the town's cemeteries, a guardian of sorts who watched over grieving families. Could Tommy be this legend come to life, or rather, refuse to die? The local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, published a cautiously worded article on Helen's findings. The story was framed as an intriguing anomaly, a town's collective imagination, perhaps given form by the camera's lens. Yet the article ignited curiosity beyond Millbrook's borders, attracting attention from paranormal enthusiasts, historians, and curious outsiders eager to witness the phenomenon themselves. Helen found her quiet life transformed overnight as strangers arrived, cameras in hand, hoping to glimpse the blinking boy in person. Despite the growing attention, no one could explain Tommy's identity. Town records and census data were scoured in search of a child, matching his description, but no definitive match emerged. Helen reached out to elderly residents, hoping to unearth oral histories or forgotten memories that might provide a clue. One by one, they recounted stories of a boy named Tommy, a local child who had died tragically 50 years prior. But details were murky, varying from family to family, tangled in rumor and folklore. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker, a sprightly woman in her 80s with a sharp memory, recalled a boy who had been known for his mischievous blinking, a tic that had amused and sometimes annoyed those around him. Tommy was a lively lad, she said, sipping her tea in the dim light of her living room, always blinking those bright eyes of his, like he was trying to see more than what was right in front of him. Folks said he had a way of knowing things before they happened. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Some said he never really left us. Such recollections, tinged with affection and mystery, painted a portrait of a boy who had been more than just a child of Millbrook. They hinted at a presence that transcended death, an echo that lingered in the town's rituals and collective memory. Yet no one could explain how he came to appear in photographs, always blinking, always watching. Helen's investigation took on a new urgency as she encountered growing unease in the community. At funerals where she was hired to photograph, subtle phenomena began to manifest. Witnesses reported whispers in empty rooms, sudden cold drafts that chilled the skin, and flickering lights that defied explanation. During one recent funeral photo session, Helen herself glimpsed Tommy's blinking figure just beyond the veil of the camera's viewfinder, as if he existed both inside and outside the frame of reality. The townspeople's responses oscillated between reverence and fear. Some believed Tommy was trying to communicate, a silent sentinel reminding them that grief was not meant to be endured in solitude. Others feared that his blinking was a sign of unrest, a spirit unable to find peace, trapped in the liminal space between life and death. Debates flared in community meetings, with some advocating for the cessation of funeral photography to avoid capturing Tommy's image, while others embraced his presence as a comforting symbol. Helen, caught between these opposing views, remained focused on the photographs themselves. She began to analyze the blinking patterns, noting subtle variations in timing and frequency that suggested a form of intentionality. Was Tommy sending a message through these involuntary gestures? Was his blinking a code, a language waiting to be deciphered? As Helen's archive expanded, so too did the town's fascination and trepidation. The boy who blinked in every funeral photo became a local legend, a figure woven into the fabric of Millbrook's identity. Children whispered his name, artists painted his likeness, and some families began to incorporate rituals acknowledging his presence during funerals, small gestures of acknowledgement to the boy who silently observed their grief. Yet for Helen, the mystery remained deeply personal. Each photograph was a portal to a story untold, a fragment of a larger puzzle that spanned time and memory. Tommy's blinking eyes challenged her understanding of life and death, presence and absence, reminding her that some mysteries refused to be confined by the ordinary rules of the world. In the quiet hours of the night, as Helen prepared her photographs and documented her findings, she often found herself watching the images of Tommy blink back at her. His gaze was steady, unwavering, as if beckoning her to look deeper, to see beyond the surface of grief and loss. And in that silent exchange, Helen felt the stirrings of a revelation, one that would soon unfold, drawing the town of Millbrook into a confrontation with its own shadows and secrets, illuminated by the blinking eyes of a boy who should not have been seen at all. Helen Marsh's growing archive of funeral photographs had become both a burden and a revelation, a sprawling mosaic of grief, memory, and an enigmatic presence that defied explanation. As she sifted through decades of images, a pattern emerged with an unsettling clarity. Tommy appeared only when a child's funeral was being commemorated. This discovery shifted the nature of the mystery from a mere curiosity to something far more profound, suggesting a connection between Tommy and the town's deepest sorrows. The realization came slowly, almost imperceptibly. Helen had long suspected that Tommy's presence was not random, but it was only after cataloguing over 100 photographs that the pattern crystallized. In every image where the deceased was a child, Tommy was there, silent, blinking, consistent. Conversely, in funerals where adults were mourned, his presence was conspicuously absent. This correlation was too precise to be coincidence. The boy who blinked was intrinsically linked to the children of Millbrook, who had passed on. Driven by this insight, Helen dove into the town's historical records, poring over birth and death registries, cemetery archives, and church logs. Millbrook, with its meticulous record-keeping, provided a rich trove of information. Helen compiled a list of every child who had died in the town over the past century, noting their ages, dates of death, and circumstances where available. The data painted a somber portrait of loss that had shaped the community's collective psyche in ways previously unrecognized. At the heart of her research was a boy named Tommy Henderson, who had died tragically 50 years earlier. Born in 1968, Tommy had been a lively child with bright eyes and a mischievous smile, remembered fondly by those who had known him. His death had been sudden and shrouded in whispers, a drowning in Millbrook's nearby river during a summer afternoon, an accident that left the town reeling and families gripped by grief. Despite the passage of time, Tommy's memory lingered in local lore, his name evoking both sorrow and a peculiar reverence. Helen's interviews with elderly residents brought Tommy's story to life with vivid detail. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker, whose house overlooked the river where Tommy had drowned, recalled the day with a tremor in her voice. "It was the kind of tragedy that changes a town," she said. "Tommy was a bright light snuffed out too soon. Folks said his spirit never left the riverbank." Agnes spoke of the boy's habitual blinking, a nervous tic that had once amused neighbors and friends, a subtle quirk that, in hindsight, seemed almost prophetic. Other residents offered fragments of memory, a faded photograph tucked away in a dusty album, a toy left on a windowsill, an old diary entry recalling Tommy's laughter. These pieces formed a tapestry of a boy who had been loved deeply, mourned profoundly, and whose presence now seemed to transcend death itself. The theory took shape that Tommy was not merely a ghost, but a guardian of sorts, linked inexorably to the funerary rites of children in Millbrook. Helen's findings rippled through the community, stirring a mixture of comfort and unease. The idea that Tommy's spirit was intertwined with the town's grieving process offered solace to some, a reminder that the dead were not entirely gone, that their essence lingered to guide and protect. But for others, the boy's blinking was a haunting symbol of unresolved sorrow, a spectral figure who reminded them of loss too raw to face. The photographic evidence only deepened the mystery. Tommy's appearances spanned generations, yet his image remained unchanged, as if frozen in a single moment of time. The clothes he wore, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the subtle tilt of his head. All were identical, from the earliest images Helen uncovered to the most recent. This temporal stasis defied natural explanation. How could a child who had died decades ago continue to manifest unchanged, blinking steadily in photographs taken long after his passing? Helen's meticulous cataloguing revealed yet another layer to the enigma. The frequency of Tommy's appearances corresponded to specific anniversaries of his death, as if his presence was strongest when the town collectively remembered him. On the 50th anniversary of Tommy's passing, multiple funeral photos captured him blinking with unusual intensity, his eyes seeming to hold a deeper message. This synchronicity suggested a consciousness behind the blinking, an awareness that transcended the photographic medium itself. As Helen continued her research, she noticed that Tommy's presence was not limited solely to funeral photographs. A handful of candid shots taken at memorial, events, cemetery gatherings, and even town festivals occasionally revealed glimpses of the boy, always on the periphery, always blinking. These sightings fueled speculation that Tommy's spirit was woven into the fabric of Millbrook's communal memory, a spectral guardian who watched over the living as they honored the dead. The town's clergy and funeral directors became involved, offering perspectives steeped in tradition and theology. Reverend Samuel Clark, Millbrook's pastor for nearly 30 years, spoke cautiously about the phenomenon. "In our faith, the soul's journey is sacred and often mysterious," he said during a community forum. "Tommy's presence may be a sign that the veil between this world and the next is thinner than we realize, especially where grief is deepest." His words resonated with many, framing the mystery as part of a spiritual continuum rather than a mere curiosity. Yet not all embraced this interpretation. Skeptics in the town argued for more mundane explanations, artifacts of photographic exposure, collective imagination, even deliberate staging. Helen, however, remained steadfast in her conviction that Tommy was neither illusion nor trick. The boy who blinked was real in a way that transcended the physical, a silent witness to the town's most intimate moments of loss. To better understand Tommy's connection to the funerary rituals, Helen began attending funerals with a new focus. She observed how families prepared, how the town gathered, and how grief unfolded in myriad forms. At each service where a child was mourned, Helen's camera sought out Tommy's blinking figure, capturing images that were both haunting and beautiful. These moments revealed a complex interplay between presence and absence, memory and mourning, life and death. In one particularly striking instance, Helen photographed the funeral of a young girl named Lily, whose passing had shaken the community deeply. As mourners gathered beneath a grey sky, Helen's lens caught Tommy standing just beyond the crowd, blinking steadily. The boy's expression seemed almost tender, a silent comfort amid the palpable sadness. This image would become one of Helen's most powerful testaments to the mystery, a visual poem of grief and remembrance. The discovery that Tommy appeared only in children's funerals reframed the entire phenomenon. It suggested that he was more than a ghostly observer. He was a symbol of innocence lost and a bridge between the living and the dead. The blinking, once a puzzling anomaly, began to feel like a gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of pain, a reminder that grief was both personal and shared. Helen's work attracted new attention from academic circles. Anthropologists and folklorists expressed interest in the role Tommy played in Millbrook's cultural landscape. Some theorized that he was a manifestation of collective trauma, an embodiment of the town's unresolved grief that found expression through photography. Others speculated that Tommy's blinking was a form of communication, a code embedded in the images waiting to be deciphered. As the community grappled with these revelations, Helen's collection grew into a profound testament to the complex ways in which memory, loss, and presence intertwine. The boy who blinked in every child's funeral photo was no longer just a spectral figure. He was the embodiment of Millbrook's enduring sorrow and its fragile hope. In the silent cadence of his blinking eyes, the town found both a mirror and a mystery, a story that stretched across generations and whispered of the unseen ties that bind the living to those who have gone before. Helen Marsh's journey into the enigma of Tommy's blinking presence had by now become deeply entwined with the lives and memories of Millbrook's oldest residents. Seeking to understand the boy beyond the photographs, Helen began a series of interviews with elders who had lived through the decades the images spanned. Their recollections painted a portrait of Tommy's life, his personality, and the circumstances of his death. Details that added layers of poignancy and complexity to the mystery that had captivated the town. Among the first to speak with Helen was Harold Benson, a retired mail carrier who had known the Henderson family personally. Harold described Tommy as a mischievous child with an infectious grin and a nervous habit of blinking rapidly when excited or anxious. He was full of life, Harold said, settling into his worn armchair in the dim light of his living room. Always blinking, like he was trying to see something just out of reach. Folks around here joked about it, but Tommy never seemed bothered by it. Harold's voice softened as he recalled the day of the tragic accident. That summer afternoon by the river. It changed everything. The town never quite healed. Another voice came from Mrs. Evelyn Carter, who had taught Tommy in the town's elementary school. She remembered him as bright and curious, with a knack for drawing intricate patterns and shapes that sometimes puzzled his teachers. Tommy's blinking was something we all noticed, she said, fingering a faded scarf as if conjuring memories. It was a quirk, yes, but also, I don't know. Sometimes it felt like he was seeing things beyond our understanding. Evelyn's eyes misted as she spoke of the rumors that swirled after Tommy's death, whispers about visions, premonitions, and an unsettled spirit that lingered near the riverbank where he had drowned. These interviews unearthed threads of folklore and speculation that had long been buried beneath the town's polite veneer. Some residents believed Tommy had been a kind of seer, gifted with glimpses of the future, or an ability to perceive realities beyond the tangible world. Others recounted tales of strange occurrences following his passing, unexplained lights flickering near the river, sudden gusts of wind on still days, and the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing through the trees. These stories, while dismissed by some as superstition, lent a spectral texture to the boy's legacy. Helen was particularly struck by a recurring theme in these accounts. Tommy's blinking had always been more than a mere physical tic. Many described it as a form of communication, a subtle signal that betrayed his awareness of things others could not see. This idea resonated deeply with Helen's photographic evidence, where the blinking seemed purposeful, almost deliberate, as if Tommy sought to bridge the gap between worlds through the language of his eyes. The process of gathering these testimonies was not without its challenges. Some elderly residents were reluctant to revisit painful memories, while others feared that speaking openly about the boy might stir forces better left undisturbed. Helen approached each conversation with sensitivity, aware that she was not merely unearthing a story, but touching the fragile threads of grief that still bound the community. In her search for context, Helen also examined the circumstances surrounding Tommy's death. Official records described a tragic accident. A hot summer day, a river swollen with recent rains, and a slip beneath the currents that claimed the boy's life. Yet the details were patchy, and Helen sensed that the official narrative was incomplete. Through conversations with local historians and family members, she learned of rumors, some whispered in hushed tones at church gatherings, suggesting that Tommy's death might have been entwined with darker secrets, perhaps a cover-up or an unexplained tragedy that the town had collectively chosen to forget. One particularly evocative account came from Sarah Henderson, Tommy's niece, who had inherited his childhood home. She remembered growing up with stories of the boy's blinking eyes and the strange occurrences that followed his death. "My grandmother always said Tommy was watching over us," Sarah told Helen during a visit to the old house, its walls lined with faded photographs and worn furniture. But there were things she never spoke about openly, things that made people uneasy. "I think Tommy's death was more than an accident. Something about it unsettled the town in ways we never fully understood." These revelations added a new dimension to the mystery. Tommy was no longer just a figure trapped in photographs. He was a living memory, a boy whose life and death had left an indelible mark on Millbrook's collective consciousness. The blinking that once seemed a trivial oddity now felt like a symbol of unresolved grief and hidden truths. Helen's interviews also uncovered the ways in which Tommy's story had become woven into the town's funerary traditions. Several residents recalled that, in the years following his death, families began to incorporate subtle rituals during funerals of children, placing small toys near the casket, lighting candles in his memory, or whispering his name to invite his presence as a guardian. These practices, though informal and varied, suggested a communal acknowledgement of Tommy's role as a spectral mourner, a silent companion to the grieving. As Helen pieced together these fragments, she began to understand that Tommy's blinking was more than an inexplicable photographic anomaly. It was a manifestation of the town's efforts to hold onto a child who had been lost too soon. The blinking signified a refusal to let go, a lingering presence that bore witness to sorrow across generations. Yet amidst the stories of tenderness and remembrance, there were also hints of fear and ambivalence. Some townspeople expressed discomfort with the idea of Tommy's spirit remaining so visible, especially in the intimate moments of grief. They worried that his presence might prevent the dead from resting, binding souls to a cycle of mourning that resisted closure. These tensions underscored the complex relationship Millbrook had with its past, a past where love and loss were inseparable, and where the boundary between life and death was porous and uncertain. Helen's work thus became a delicate balancing act, honoring the memory of a boy who had become a symbol of communal grief, while navigating the anxieties and mysteries that his presence evoked. Each interview, each photograph, deepened the narrative, revealing the multifaceted ways in which Tommy's blinking eyes had become a mirror reflecting the town's hopes, fears, and unspoken secrets. In the quiet hours of reflection, Helen often thought about those blinking eyes, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a language to be understood. Tommy's blinking was a gesture of connection, a silent communication that transcended words and time. Through the stories of those who had known him, and through the images that bore his likeness, Tommy lived on, not just as a boy who had died, but as a presence woven into the fabric of Millbrook's enduring story of love, loss, and remembrance. As spring deepened into summer, the quiet unease that had been simmering beneath Millbrook's surface began to manifest in ways more tangible and unsettling than before. The boy who blinked in every funeral photo was no longer a mere curiosity or whispered legend. He had become an active presence felt by many during the town's most solemn gatherings. Strange phenomena began to ripple through the funerary rituals, blurring the lines between memory and the supernatural, and leaving residents grappling with a new, disquieting reality. It started subtly. At several recent funerals where children were mourned, witnesses reported fleeting whispers carried on the wind, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The whispers were often accompanied by sudden, inexplicable cold draughts that sent shivers through those gathered even in the warmth of early summer. Flickering lights, too, became a common occurrence, candles guttering despite the absence of wind, overhead bulbs dimming and brightening in rhythm with the mourners' sobs. Helen first encountered these manifestations during the funeral of a young boy named Samuel, whose passing had cast a pall across Millbrook. As she raised her camera to capture the mourner's grief, she noticed a shadow flitting at the edge of her lens. When she glanced up, there was nothing but the gathering of somber faces and the rustle of leaves. Yet the photographs taken that day revealed Tommy, unmistakable in his faded blue jacket, blinking steadily beside the grieving family, his presence more vivid than ever before. That night, Helen's studio was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the low hum of the developing machine. As the images emerged, she felt an unsettling sensation, as if the boy's blinking eyes were watching her, urging her to look closer, to understand what lay beyond the surface. The photographs seemed to capture not just the moments of farewell, but something ineffable, a communion between the living and the dead, mediated by the spectral boy. Word of these occurrences spread swiftly. Families who had recently lost children shared stories of whispered voices and cold touches during funeral services, of lights flickering in time with their tears. Some described glimpsing a fleeting figure at the edge of their vision, a child whose blinking eyes bore both sorrow and compassion. The town was awash with a sense of unease mingled with awe, as if the veil between worlds had thinned in the presence of grief. Tensions rose as the community struggled to reconcile these experiences with their beliefs and traditions. For some, Tommy's blinking became a comforting sign, a guardian spirit offering silent solace amid the pain. For others, it was a harbinger of unrest, a spectral reminder that the dead had not fully departed, that their presence lingered in ways both wondrous and disturbing. During a funeral held under a grey sky, Helen witnessed firsthand the intensity of Tommy's influence. As she prepared to photograph the service, a sudden chill swept through the chapel, causing candles to flicker wildly. The mourners shivered, exchanging uneasy glances. In the corner of one photograph, Tommy appeared, his blinking eyes luminous against the dim light. Helen later learned that several attendees had felt unexplained touches on their shoulders, heard faint whispers in unoccupied pews, and sensed a watchful presence throughout the ceremony. These phenomena extended beyond the funerals themselves. Residents reported hearing soft laughter echoing through empty streets at dusk, shadows moving just beyond the reach of lamplight, and the sensation of being gently observed during moments of solitude. The boy who blinked had become a spectral thread woven into the everyday fabric of Millbrook's life, a presence both elusive and undeniable. Helen's documentation of these events grew more urgent. She began recording testimonies, collecting photographs, and collaborating with local clergy and paranormal experts to understand the nature of Tommy's manifestations. Reverend Samuel Clark spoke of the experiences as signs of a liminal space, the threshold between life and death, where spirits might linger to comfort or warn. "Grief is a powerful force," he said during a community meeting. "It can open doors we do not fully comprehend." Not all responses were welcoming. Some townspeople feared that Tommy's presence was a curse, an interruption of the natural order that prevented the dead from resting and the living from healing. Calls were made to alter funeral practices, to limit photography during services, or even to ban it outright, sparking heated debates within the close-knit community. Helen found herself at the center of these tensions, torn between her role as chronicler and the mounting fears that her work might be exacerbating the unrest. Amid this turmoil, Helen observed a shift in Tommy's blinking itself. Where once it had been a steady, rhythmic flutter, it now showed moments of irregularity, pauses, quickened blinks, and patterns that suggested agitation or distress. During one recent funeral, she captured an image where Tommy's eyes blinked rapidly in succession, almost as if signaling an urgent message. This change unsettled Helen deeply, hinting that the boy's presence was not static, but responsive to the emotions and events unfolding around him. The community's unease was mirrored in the behavior of the youngest generation. Children spoke of seeing Tommy in their dreams, or catching glimpses of a blinking figure watching from the shadows. Some refused to attend funerals, frightened by the boy who seemed both familiar and otherworldly. Parents grappled with how to explain these experiences, caught between protecting innocence and facing the inexplicable. Despite the growing tension, a small group of townspeople began to embrace Tommy's presence as a guardian of sorts, a silent mourner who bore witness to the pain that words could not express. Families started to incorporate rituals acknowledging him, leaving small tokens near gravesites, speaking his name softly during services, or lighting candles in his honor. These acts of remembrance transformed Tommy's blinking from a spectral oddity into a symbol of communal grief and resilience. Helen's role evolved accordingly. No longer merely an observer, she became a mediator, collecting stories, soothing fears, and fostering dialogue about the boy who blinked. Her studio became a gathering place for those seeking understanding, a space where the living could share their experiences and find solace in shared mystery. Yet with every photograph developed and every story recorded, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural grew more tenuous. Helen sensed that Tommy's blinking was more than a symbol. It was a presence reaching out, a voice in the silence of mourning, a reminder that grief was a landscape inhabited not only by loss, but by connection. In the unfolding weeks, as funerals continued and the patterns of phenomena intensified, the town of Millbrook stood at a crossroads. The boy who blinked had moved from the edges of memory into the heart of collective experience, challenging the community to confront the unseen and to reconsider the ways in which sorrow, remembrance, and the veil between worlds intertwined in the fragile dance of life and death. The unsettling phenomena surrounding Tommy's blinking presence in Millbrook's funeral photos had transformed from whispered rumors into a matter of public concern, inviting a wave of inquiries from paranormal investigators, psychologists, and skeptics alike. As the town grappled with its growing unease, Helen Marsh found herself at the epicenter of a swirling debate, where scientific inquiry collided with spiritual belief, and where community tensions stretched to a breaking point. The arrival of a small team of paranormal experts marked a turning point in Millbrook's unfolding saga. Led by Dr. Marcus Layton, a seasoned parapsychologist known for his methodical approach, the team set up equipment during several funerals, hoping to capture empirical evidence of Tommy's spectral presence and the strange disturbances reported by mourners. Cameras, audio recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, and thermal imaging devices lined the chapel walls, their blinking lights a stark contrast to the subdued grief of the attendees. Dr. Layton's preliminary findings were inconclusive yet compelling. The equipment registered unexplained cold spots in areas where Tommy was most frequently photographed, and audio devices picked up faint, indecipherable whispers that seemed to fluctuate in intensity with the emotional tenor of the gatherings. Thermal imaging revealed occasional heat signatures that did not correspond to any visible person. Yet, despite these anomalies, no definitive proof emerged to conclusively identify Tommy as a ghost or spirit, leaving the phenomenon tantalizingly elusive. Meanwhile, psychologists specializing in grief and mass perception offered alternative explanations. Dr. Claire Emerson, a clinical psychologist from a nearby university, suggested that the sightings and experiences might be manifestations of collective grief, a psychological response to shared trauma. When a community undergoes repeated loss, especially involving children, the mind can create symbolic figures that embody unresolved sorrow, she explained during a town hall meeting. Tommy's blinking could be a projection, a coping mechanism that helps people process the pain of loss. These conflicting perspectives ignited fierce discussions within Millbrook. Some residents embraced the scientific approach, hopeful that empirical investigation would demystify Tommy's presence and provide closure. Others rejected the clinical explanations as reductive, insisting that Tommy was more than a psychological construct, that he was a real presence, a guardian spirit, or an unresolved soul-seeking connection. Helen, caught between these divergent views, found herself advocating for a nuanced understanding. Drawing on her photographic evidence and the testimonies she had gathered, she proposed that Tommy's blinking was a symbol laden with meaning, an expression of lingering grief and unfinished stories that transcended simple categorization. Whether Tommy is a spirit, a memory, or something else entirely, she told a community forum, his blinking reminds us that grief is not neat or tidy. It's complex, persistent, and deeply human. The debate spilled over into the town's social fabric. Attempts to restrict funeral photography sparked protests and counter-protests. Some families, fearing that photographing funerals invited Tommy's unsettling presence, urged for a ban, or at least a strict limitation on cameras during services. Others viewed photography as a sacred act of remembrance, a way to honor both the living and the dead, including Tommy himself. Heated town meetings revealed the split, with neighbors who once gathered amicably now divided by fear and uncertainty. Local clergy played a mediating role amidst the discord. Reverend Samuel Clark emphasized compassion and understanding, encouraging the community to view Tommy's presence as a call to empathy rather than division. In our grief, we are reminded of our shared humanity, he said during a sermon. Tommy's blinking calls us to hold space for sorrow, for memory, and for hope. Amidst these tensions, Helen continued her documentation, mindful of the sensitivities involved. She proposed a community project, a collective archive of funeral photographs, stories, and reflections that would serve as both a memorial and a forum for dialogue. The initiative aimed to embrace the mystery rather than suppress it, fostering a shared narrative in which Tommy's presence was acknowledged as part of the town's healing process. However, the community's unease was palpable. At times, Helen herself felt the weight of the boy's blinking gaze, as if Tommy's silent watchfulness bore down on her, with an urgency she could neither fully comprehend nor ignore. During a recent funeral photo session, Helen caught Tommy blinking rapidly in the corner of an image, an intensity that felt like both a plea and a warning. This incident sparked renewed speculation that Tommy's blinking was more than symbolic, that it might be a form of communication. Helen began analyzing the intervals between blinks, searching for patterns or codes that could unlock hidden messages. Early results were inconclusive but intriguing. Certain sequences seemed to correspond with dates or names connected to Millbrook's history of missing children and unresolved tragedies. The possibility that Tommy's blinking encoded a message added a new layer of mystery and urgency. It suggested that beneath the boy's spectral presence lay a story yet to be fully told, a narrative intertwined with the town's collective memory and perhaps its darkest secrets. Helen shared these findings cautiously, aware that such revelations could deepen fear or spark hope, depending on how they were received. The community's response was mixed. Some embraced the idea of Tommy as a messenger, a spectral guide revealing truths long buried. Others feared that unraveling the message might unleash forces beyond their control, or expose wounds too raw to bear. The tension between curiosity and caution shaped the town's ongoing dialogue, reflecting the complex interplay between belief, grief, and the unknown. In the midst of this, Helen found solace in her work, and in the support of a small circle of friends and collaborators who shared her commitment to understanding. Together, they navigated the fragile boundary between science and spirit, memory and mystery, seeking meaning in the blinking eyes that had become both a symbol and a presence in Millbrook's story. As debates raged and investigations continued, the town stood at a crossroads, a place where tradition met transformation, where grief challenged understanding, and where the blinking boy in every funeral photo remained an enigmatic witness to the enduring human struggle to make sense of loss and to find connection beyond the veil. The story of Tommy, the boy who blinked in every funeral photo, had long been a whispered local mystery, confined mostly to the conversations of Millbrook's residents and the careful documentation of Helen Marsh. But as news of her findings spread beyond the town's borders, the quiet community found itself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. Media outlets arrived in waves, government researchers expressed formal interest, and Millbrook's once private mourning rituals became a stage for public spectacle and scientific inquiry. It began with a feature article in a regional newspaper, which described Tommy's presence as an inexplicable phenomenon that defies both science and superstition. The piece, though measured in tone, sparked widespread fascination. Within days, journalists from national outlets descended on Millbrook, cameras poised and notebooks ready, eager to capture the story of the blinking boy who haunted funerals. Helen found herself fielding calls and interviews, suddenly cast as the reluctant spokesperson for a mystery that had consumed her life in recent months. The media frenzy brought a mix of excitement and strain to the town. Local businesses saw a surge of visitors, some curious, some skeptical, others drawn by a morbid fascination. The influx disrupted the town's quiet rhythms, with funeral services overshadowed by the presence of reporters and onlookers. Families mourning loved ones found their grief complicated by the intrusion, and Helen grappled with the ethical challenges of balancing public interest with respect for personal loss. Amid this heightened attention, government agencies took notice. Representatives from a federal department specializing in unexplained phenomena arrived, requesting access to Helen's extensive photographic archive and offering to conduct their own investigations. Official researchers brought sophisticated equipment, thermal cameras, motion sensors, and spectral analyzers, to funeral services and archival sites, seeking tangible evidence to explain Tommy's blinking presence. Their findings, however, were inconclusive. Despite exhaustive testing, no scientific explanation could account for the boy's consistent appearance or the peculiar blinking captured in photographs spanning decades. The researchers' reports acknowledged the phenomenon as anomalous and unexplained, fueling further intrigue and speculation. Yet, concerned with public reaction, government officials maintained a cautious stance, limiting the release of sensitive information and conducting much of their work behind closed doors. Helen's role evolved as she became a liaison between the community, the media, and the officials. She worked tirelessly to protect the dignity of grieving families while facilitating research and managing the growing public interest. The weight of this responsibility was heavy, at times overwhelming, but Helen remained committed to uncovering the truth behind Tommy's blinking eyes. During this period, several families came forward with personal accounts that deepened the mystery. They described experiences during funerals where Tommy's presence felt tangible, not just in photographs, but in the atmosphere itself. Some spoke of fleeting shadows, sudden chills, and unexplainable sensations of being watched. A few reported hearing soft, childlike laughter or whispering voices when no one else was near. These testimonies added a human dimension to the phenomenon, reminding observers that Tommy was not simply an image frozen in time, but a presence felt and remembered. Helen documented these accounts meticulously, adding them to her growing archive. She also collaborated with a team of psychologists who sought to understand the psychological impact of Tommy's presence on the town's residents. Preliminary studies suggested that the boy's blinking might serve as a focal point for collective grief, providing a shared symbol through which the community processed loss and remembrance. Yet beneath the layers of scientific scrutiny and media spectacle, a more profound narrative was unfolding. Helen noticed a subtle shift in the way Tommy was perceived within Millbrook itself. Where once his blinking had been a source of fear or confusion, it was increasingly embraced as a guardian figure, an unseen mourner who stood vigil over the town's children and its grieving families. Families began incorporating small rituals, acknowledging Tommy during funerals, lighting candles in his memory, placing tokens near grave sites, or whispering his name as a sign of respect. This communal embrace of Tommy as a spiritual presence brought solace to many. In the face of inexplicable loss, the boy who blinked offered a connection, a reminder that grief was shared, that the departed were not forgotten, and that memory itself could transcend the limits of mortality. Helen found herself moved by these acts, recognizing that the mystery of Tommy had become entwined with the town's identity and its way of navigating sorrow. However, the increased attention also brought challenges. Some residents resented the intrusion of outsiders, fearing that the media and government interest would exploit their pain or reduce their traditions to spectacle. Others worried that the fascination with Tommy might overshadow the individuals being mourned, turning funerals into public events rather than private moments of remembrance. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, requiring careful mediation to maintain community cohesion. Helen sought to balance these competing forces by fostering open dialogue and encouraging respect for the town's customs. She organized forums where residents, researchers, and officials could share perspectives, ask questions, and voice concerns. These gatherings became vital spaces for collective reflection and healing, reinforcing the community's agency in shaping the narrative around Tommy. Amid the swirl of activity, Helen continued her own investigation into the blinking boy. She pored over photographs, searching for new clues in the subtle variations of Tommy's expression and the timing of his appearances. Patterns emerged, blink sequences that seemed to correspond with significant dates, names, or events linked to the town's history. This suggested an intentionality behind the blinking, hinting at a message encoded in the silent gestures of the boy who should not have been seen. The possibility that Tommy's blinking constituted a form of communication captivated both researchers and residents. It offered hope that the mystery might one day be unraveled, that the boy's presence was not merely a haunting, but a bridge between worlds, a conduit for truths long buried. Helen's work took on new urgency as she collaborated with linguists and cryptologists, exploring the blinking as a coded language. As months passed, the story of Tommy transcended Millbrook, captivating a wider audience fascinated by the intersection of grief, memory, and the unexplained. Documentaries were proposed, academic papers written, and conferences organized, all centered on the boy who blinked in every funeral photo. Yet, despite the growing body of research and speculation, Tommy remained an enigma, a spectral figure whose blinking eyes continued to watch over the town's mourners with a silent, inscrutable gaze. Through it all, Helen remained grounded in the community that had first revealed the mystery. She understood that, beyond the media frenzy and the scientific inquiry, Tommy's blinking was a deeply human story, a story of loss and remembrance, of a town bound together by grief and the desire to hold on to what had passed. And in that realization lay the heart of the mystery itself, a reminder that some presences, like some memories, endure not because they are fully understood, but because they are deeply felt. As the phenomenon of Tommy's blinking presence in funeral photographs continued to captivate Millbrook and beyond, Helen Marsh found herself drawn into the complex task of deciphering what lay beneath the boy's enigmatic gaze. What had once been a haunting curiosity had grown into a profound mystery, one that hinted at communication, coded messages, and a past shrouded in secrets. Helen's meticulous analysis of the blinking patterns began to yield startling results, suggesting that Tommy might be trying to convey something far more significant than mere presence. Working late into many nights, Helen pored over the thousands of images she had collected over the years, examining the intervals of Tommy's blinks with increasing scrutiny. At first, the blinking seemed random, a natural reflex caught in the stillness of a photograph. But as she compared images across decades, a pattern emerged. The timing and frequency of the blinks appeared deliberate, almost like a code. Helen began to map these sequences, noting clusters of rapid blinks and longer pauses that suggested an underlying structure. Collaborating with a linguist specializing in nonverbal communication, Helen explored the possibility that Tommy's blinking followed a form of Morse code or a similarly structured signaling system. The linguist, Dr. Elena Ramirez, was intrigued by the idea that a child's blink could serve as a medium for transmitting information, especially across the veil of death and memory. Together, they began translating the patterns, cross-referencing the sequences with local historical events, dates, and names. The first breakthrough came when a series of blinks corresponded to dates significant in Millbrook's history, specifically anniversaries of tragedies involving children. One sequence matched the date of Tommy Henderson's own death, while others aligned with lesser-known incidents of missing or deceased children in the town's past. This suggested that Tommy's blinking was not only purposeful, but intimately tied to the collective memory of loss in Millbrook. Further analysis revealed that some blink sequences spelled out names, those of children who had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, their stories largely forgotten or obscured by time. Helen realized that Tommy's presence was drawing attention to these buried tragedies, as if urging the town to remember and reckon with its past. This revelation transformed Tommy from a spectral observer into a messenger, a guardian of memories long neglected. The implications of this discovery rippled through the community. Families of missing children, some resigned to silence for decades, found a renewed sense of connection and hope. The blinking boys' coded messages became a catalyst for reopening old cases, prompting renewed investigations and the uncovering of long-suppressed truths. Helen's archive grew not just as a collection of images, but as a living document of Millbrook's intertwined histories of grief and remembrance. At the heart of this unfolding narrative was a profound reckoning. Tommy's blinking was a reminder that loss was never solitary. It was woven into the fabric of community and memory. His presence challenged the town to confront painful secrets, cover-ups, forgotten tragedies, and the ways in which grief had been silenced or ignored. The blinking was a call to bear witness, to honor the children whose voices had been lost to time. Helen's work attracted renewed scholarly interest. Anthropologists and historians saw in Tommy's blinking a rare instance of collective memory, encoded in a medium both visual and cryptic. Some proposed that the phenomenon was a form of cultural transmission, a spectral archive that preserved narratives otherwise erased. Others debated whether Tommy's blinking was a supernatural message or a psychological manifestation of communal grief given form through photography. Amid the academic attention, the town of Millbrook engaged in its own process of healing and reckoning. Memorials were established for the children whose names had been revealed through Tommy's blinking sequences. Town meetings and candlelight vigils honored their memories, weaving them back into the community's ongoing story. Families found solace in shared remembrance, transforming grief into a collective act of acknowledgement. Yet even as understanding deepened, the mystery retained its unsettling edge. Tommy's blinking never fully resolved into a clear message. Some sequences remained undeciphered, their meanings elusive. The boy's gaze, blinking steadily from the photographs, continued to challenge any simple interpretation, reminding observers that some mysteries resist closure. Helen herself felt the weight of this ambiguity. The blinking was both a beacon and a veil, a source of insight and a reminder of the limits of human understanding. In moments of quiet reflection, she contemplated the possibility that Tommy's blinking was not just about revealing secrets, but about sustaining a connection, a way to keep memory alive in a world that so often forgets. As the town grappled with these revelations, new questions emerged. Was Tommy's blinking a unique phenomenon, or part of a broader pattern that transcended Millbrook? Did the boy's presence signify a personal story, or a universal one about loss, memory, and the ways the living engage with the dead? Helen's research became a quest not only to decode blinking patterns, but to explore the deeper meanings embedded in grief and remembrance. Community reactions were varied. Some embraced the blinking as a sacred language, a gift from beyond that offered guidance and comfort. Others regarded it with skepticism or fear, wary of what the messages might imply, or the truths they could unearth. Debates flourished about how to interpret and respond to the boy's silent communication. In the midst of this, Helen found herself both a chronicler and a participant, bearing witness to the ways in which Tommy's blinking had reshaped Millbrook's relationship with its past. Each photograph, each blink, was a fragment of a larger story. A story of children lost and remembered, of secrets brought into the light, and of a community's enduring struggle to hold on to its history. Through it all, the blinking boy remained a constant presence, silent, watchful, and blinking with quiet insistence. His gaze invited those who looked upon it to see beyond the surface of grief, to engage with the shadows of memory, and to listen to the unspoken stories whispered in the intervals between blinks. In this silent dialogue, Helen sensed the profound truth at the heart of the mystery. That remembrance itself is a language, one that transcends words and images and speaks directly to the soul. As the seasons shifted and the years passed, Tommy's blinking presence in Millbrook's funeral photographs evolved from a perplexing anomaly into a profound, if enigmatic, legacy. The boy whose gaze had silently watched over the town's grieving families became woven into the fabric of Millbrook's collective identity, a symbol of sorrow, remembrance, and the complex interplay between life and death. The frequency of Tommy's appearances in funeral photos persisted, though a subtle transformation took hold. His blinking became less constant, the intervals between his appearances lengthening, suggesting a gradual fading or resolution. For many, this change reflected a hopeful sign that the restless spirit, or the memory embodied by Tommy, was finding peace alongside the children whose loss he had silently witnessed for so long. Families who once feared Tommy's presence began to embrace it as a source of comfort. In recent funerals, some chose to acknowledge the boy directly, incorporating rituals that honored him as a guardian of grief. Small tokens, a worn blue jacket, a pair of scuffed sneakers, or a flickering candle, were placed near caskets or grave sites, acts of recognition that transformed Tommy from a spectral observer into a participant in the communal mourning. Helen Marsh, whose steadfast dedication had chronicled the mystery from its inception, published a book compiling her photographs, interviews, and analyses. The volume offered not only a visual record, but also a meditation on grief and memory, exploring how Tommy's blinking had challenged and reshaped Millbrook's understanding of loss. The book resonated beyond the town, drawing attention from scholars, artists, and spiritual seekers, intrigued by the intersection of the supernatural and the human heart. The publication sparked renewed interest in Millbrook's history and funerary traditions. Researchers delved into the town's archives, uncovering forgotten narratives of loss and resilience. Local artists created works inspired by Tommy's image, translating his blinking eyes into paintings, sculptures, and performances that explored themes of presence, absence, and remembrance. The boy who had once been a silent figure in the background became a muse, a symbol of the enduring human need to hold on to what is lost. Simultaneously, the town began to formally recognize Tommy's role in its collective memory. A small memorial was erected in the cemetery, a modest stone engraved with the likeness of a boy blinking, flanked by the names of children who had passed. The memorial became a gathering place for families during funerals and anniversaries, a space where grief was both shared and honored. It served as a tangible acknowledgement that some presences, though unseen by most, remain deeply felt. The establishment of the memorial also marked a turning point in how the community engaged with the supernatural aspect of Tommy's story. Where fear and skepticism had once predominated, a spirit of acceptance emerged, an understanding that the boundaries between life and death were permeable, and that grief could manifest in myriad, sometimes inexplicable ways. In this shift, Millbrook found a new language for mourning, one that embraced mystery as part of healing. Helen's ongoing work reflected this evolving perspective. She continued to collect photographs, noting the gradual decrease in Tommy's blinking appearances, but also the deepening emotional responses they elicited. Interviews with families revealed a growing sense of peace, a feeling that Tommy's presence had helped them navigate the most difficult moments of loss. For many, the boy who blinked was less a ghost and more a guardian, a silent companion through grief's darkest hours. Yet the mystery remained alive. Occasionally, new photographs would capture Tommy's blinking eyes where none had appeared before, suggesting that his legacy still reached into the present. Some families reported dreams or visions of the boy, moments of connection that transcended the ordinary. These experiences reaffirmed that Tommy's story was not confined to the past, but continued to resonate in the lives of those who mourned. The Royal Commission for Linguistic Anomalies, established to investigate the blinking patterns and their possible meanings, released a series of reports that acknowledged the phenomenon as a rare form of non-verbal communication. Their findings suggested that Tommy's blinking acted as a conduit for collective memory and emotional transmission, functioning as a bridge between the living and the dead. While the Commission stopped short of definitive conclusions, their work legitimized the significance of Tommy's blinking in both scientific and cultural discourse. As Millbrook embraced this new understanding, the community also grappled with the broader implications of Tommy's legacy. The phenomenon challenged conventional notions of mourning, presence, and memory, inviting reflection on how societies honor their dead and process grief. Tommy's blinking became a lens through which the town, and by extension, a wider audience, explored the intersections of history, memory, and the supernatural. Families began to hold ceremonies that acknowledged Tommy's role as a guardian or mourner, blending traditional funerary rites with new rituals inspired by the boy's enduring presence. These ceremonies fostered a sense of connection and continuity, affirming that grief was not an isolated experience, but a shared journey. In embracing Tommy, the town found a way to weave loss into its living narrative, transforming sorrow into collective strength. Helen's book and the subsequent cultural dialogue sparked by Tommy's story influenced scholars and practitioners in fields as diverse as anthropology, psychology, theology, and art. Conferences and symposia dedicated to the phenomenon considered its implications for understanding how humans relate to death and memory. Tommy's blinking eyes became a symbol of the ineffable, the ways in which loss transcends language, and the enduring human desire to communicate beyond the limits of life. Throughout this transformation, Helen remained deeply connected to Millbrook and its people. Her work was not merely academic or artistic, but profoundly personal, a testament to the power of observation, empathy, and the willingness to engage with mystery. She understood that Tommy's blinking was both a question and an answer, a reminder that some aspects of human experience defy explanation, yet resonate with profound truth. As the town moved forward, Tommy's legacy continued to inspire, comfort, and challenge. The boy who blinked in every funeral photo had become more than a ghost or a mystery. He was a guardian of memory, a symbol of grief's persistence, and a catalyst for communal healing. In his silent, blinking gaze, Millbrook found a mirror reflecting its own journey through loss and remembrance, a journey that, like Tommy's blinking, was ongoing, complex, and deeply human. In the years following the widespread recognition of Tommy's blinking presence, Millbrook transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The boy who had silently inhabited the edges of every child's funeral photograph became more than an enigmatic figure. He became a touchstone for the community's understanding of grief, memory, and the unseen threads that bind the living and the dead. The story of Tommy's blinking eyes moved beyond local legend to become a subject of scholarly debate, spiritual reflection, and cultural inquiry, eliciting a spectrum of interpretations that illuminated the complexities of human loss. Scholars and spiritual leaders alike pondered the meaning of Tommy's persistent blinking. Some proposed that the phenomenon was a manifestation of collective memory materialized, a spectral archive encoded in photographs that served as a vessel for communal mourning. Others viewed Tommy as a guardian spirit, a silent sentinel who bore witness to the pain and resilience of generations, ensuring that no child's passing was ever forgotten. Psychologists suggested that Tommy's blinking symbolized the inescapable imprint of grief, a visual echo of sorrow that lingered in the collective unconscious. The debates underscored the multifaceted nature of Tommy's presence, resisting reduction to a single explanation. For the people of Millbrook, however, the boy who blinked was less a puzzle to be solved than a companion through the labyrinth of loss. Families recounted how acknowledging Tommy's presence helped them navigate sorrow, offering a sense of connection that transcended the silence of death. The blinking eyes in photographs became a language of mourning, a silent dialogue between the living and those who had passed. This evolving relationship with grief inspired new traditions within the town. Annual memorial gatherings were held, where families, friends, and neighbors came together to honor both the departed and the enduring legacy of the blinking boy. These ceremonies blended solemn remembrance with celebration, weaving stories, music, and shared memories into a tapestry of collective healing. Tommy's image, now immortalized in murals and sculptures, served as a beacon of solace and continuity. Meanwhile, experiences of individuals speaking or understanding Tommy's impossible blinking language emerged during altered states of consciousness, dreams, and meditative practices. These accounts described insights into complex scientific concepts, philosophical reflections, and emotional revelations, suggesting that Tommy's blinking was not merely a passive phenomenon, but an active channel for transcendent knowledge. Some who encountered this language reported a deepened cognitive awareness, as if the blinking pattern unlocked new dimensions of perception. The Royal Commission for Linguistic Anomalies expanded its research, exploring the implications of Tommy's blinking as a technology capable of accelerating cognitive development. Their findings posited that the boy's language transcended traditional human communication, operating on multiple levels simultaneously: emotional, intellectual, and perhaps even metaphysical. This theory challenged conventional boundaries of linguistics, neuroscience, and spirituality, inviting interdisciplinary exploration into the nature of consciousness itself. As the decades unfolded, reports surfaced of individuals beyond Millbrook encountering the blinking boy or learning his language, often during moments of profound grief or transformation. These sightings suggested that Tommy's influence extended far beyond the small town, hinting at a phenomenon that could replicate across susceptible minds and cultures. The boy who blinked became, in a sense, a universal symbol, a reminder that sorrow and memory are shared human experiences that transcend geography and time. Millbrook, once a quiet town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, became a pilgrimage site for those seeking connection to the blinking boy and the mysteries he embodied. Visitors came not only to witness the photographs and memorials, but to engage with the intangible legacy of grief and remembrance that Tommy represented. The town embraced its role as a guardian of this enigmatic narrative, balancing respect for tradition with openness to the unknown. Helen Marsh's pioneering work remained central to this ongoing story. Her archives, writings, and advocacy preserved the delicate balance between scientific inquiry and spiritual reflection, ensuring that Tommy's blinking was approached with both rigor and empathy. Helen's reflections emphasized that the phenomenon was a mirror, reflecting humanity's deepest fears, hopes, and the perennial struggle to find meaning in loss. In the final analysis, Tommy's blinking defied easy categorization. Was he a ghost, a memory, a linguistic anomaly, or a cosmic messenger? Perhaps he was all of these and none. A figure whose blinking eyes invited endless interpretation and whose presence underscored the mysteries at the heart of existence. His silent gaze challenged humanity to confront the limits of understanding, to embrace the unknown, and to find solace in the shared experience of mourning. The boy who blinked in every funeral photo remains to this day a haunting and beautiful enigma. His story continues to inspire, comfort, and provoke thought, reminding the world that grief is not merely an end, but a complex ongoing conversation between the living and the dead. In the blinking of a child's eyes, Millbrook and those who have encountered Tommy's legacy have found a language beyond words, a language that speaks to the enduring power of memory, the persistence of love, and the fragile beauty of human connection across time.